grandson. He graduated from college 2 years ago.
Those are Vic's pictures.
Yeah.
Do you know whose trucks they are?
Yeah, this one here. Just scan them in with a scanner, on the computer, put them on a disk.
Yeah,
And then he could pick out whatever he wanted to use.
I remember down there at Hannah's at Law Cave, they had one sitting down there.
He had one.
Rooting around this old Brockway jumping stuff that I have. I had this brand new.
It seems like you drive backwards better than you do forwards.
I was going down. God damn, I thought, goddamn garage source Springbrook.
I got to tell this story about my very early trucking career. It starts back in Bellefonte. My grandfather had a service station on Lynn Street in Bellefonte, just down the hill from where Carl Caparel lived. And we were right next to the garage called Bellefonte Motor Sales, which then was International and Pontiac Sales, which a lot of guys in this room know where Bellefonte Motor Sales was. So our gas station was kind of the original truck stop for Bellefonte. So all the coal trucks, whatever else, parked around our gas station, and the gas station kind of ran by itself. My grandfather wasn't there. We took turns manning the pumps, and I'd drive Carl's truck and he'd run the gas station, and then I'd get in somebody else's truck and he'd run the gas station. We'd take turns. Well, I had a 1935 Ford Coupe. That was my transportation. I was in high school. I was 18 years old when I decided to trade the car on a truck, because back in those days, Keith Rimmy was just starting in the trucking business. He had a contract to haul coal over to the American Viscose plant in Lewistown. So he told me that if I bought a truck, he would give me a job. So I bought this 1946 GMC. It was supposed to be a V-licensed truck. But when I bought it, it had 750/20 tires, which means it'd be about a U-licensed truck, even though it had a 2-speed axle. So I transferred my plates off of my car to my truck through Jess Lingefelder in Bellefonte, who sold a lot of vehicles to Carl and his dad and a lot of other people in Bellefonte. So Bob Caparel, Carl's brother, younger brother, had just bought a brand new GMC V-license truck. And he and I together went out to Pine Glen, I believe, and loaded our 2 loads of coal. It was probably very early evening in the fall. And coming back down through Runville, we decided to change lanes on the road. So I'd go to the left and he'd go to the right. We just kept crisscrossing the road till we got to the curve by Davison Brothers, above Davison Brothers. At that point, a lump of coal rolled off my truck in front of a state police car coming the other direction. So we knew we were in trouble. So we immediately went down to Davison Brothers and turned left and went up through the driveway by Davison Brothers' mother's house. We parked the trucks up back of the house, jumped out, and ran up in the woods. Well, lo and behold, it wasn't too long until this police car came down the road, and back in the 40s, the radio antenna was straight up through the roof. Well, that antenna was laying straight out like this. This could tell you how fast that police car was going. He was after us big time. Well, they get down to Wingate at the intersection and couldn't find us. So they come back up the road real slow like, and all of a sudden they spied our 2 trucks up back Mrs. Davison's house. So they went in, knocked on the door, and Paul Davison was in there, and they said, where'd these trucks come from? And Paul said, well, we're just having dinner. All I know is I heard brakes screeching and a hell of a lot of smoke and dust going on. He said, next thing I know, there's 2 trucks parked in my backyard. He said, I don't know where they came from. So the state police said, well, we're looking for those 2 drivers. So they scanned my license plate and realized that I had a car license plate on a truck, which was illegal to begin with. So they went down to Wingate intersection and they established a checkpoint there. They stopped all the cars going to and from looking for us. So I went into Davison's house and I called my cousin back at the gas station, Earl Schultz. I said, Earl, he had a 4-door, like about a 1938 Plymouth sedan. I said, come on up here to Davison's, pick us up and take us back to the gas station. We're in a little trouble. So he came up to the Davisons and we got in the car and we both laid down the floorboards on the back because we knew we were going to be searched when we got to Wingate. Well, we get to Wingate, state police pulled us over and just came to the window, and the other cop said, "Hey, I got sight of them up in Runville, come on." So the other cop got in the car and left us go. Said, "Okay, you guys go ahead." So we got to the gas station. So left us off. Bob, he went home over the hill. I went in the gas station, sat down in my chair, and was tending to business. Phone rings. Bob says, "Hey, get out, get out." I said, "What's the matter?" He said, "The cops are coming in the front door. Get out, get out." So, so Carl's dad was there, and he said, "What'd you guys do now?" And Bob said, "Well, we got in a little trouble." And the state police come through the front door, and his dad said, "Do whatever you have to those two guys. You know, I don't care what you do. They're in trouble, take care of them." So down over the hill comes the state police car with Bob in the back seat. They motioned for me to come on out of the gas station, see? Boy, they read, I'll never, it was Mike Mutch was the one state cop. They read the riot act us, and they said, "Look, you guys, we really can't arrest you because we didn't catch you up there. But I'm telling you right now," he said, "you two guys are going in the state police yearbook." I said, "What's that mean?" He said, "What that means is if you have any kind of infraction of any kind," he said, "you're probably going to go to jail." He said, "This book goes all over the state, so we know where the hell you two guys are." They bobbed you out of the car, state police took off. That was the end of that situation. But that was my first experience, the first load of coal I ever hauled in my life, and we got in lots of trouble. So that was it. And from there on in, we went different ways, and here we are today.
Yeah, my trucking days started about 1934. Not that I drove back then, but my father had a Model A Ford, and I somewhat inherited to be a mechanic when I was about six years old, 5. But anyhow, skip all this here. Back in, after I got out of the Army, my father and brothers were international buyers, you know, and we always had trouble with the son of a bitches. And anyhow, International Harvester factory man come in there and want to know this problem that we were having breaking dry shafts. At that time, they had first 10-wheelers that came out, the dry shaft came across the housing back to the back rear, and every time you went in the coal strippings, that front rear went up in the air and either bent that dry shaft or broke it. So they finally got that problem cured. And he said to my dad, he said, "You know, we're looking for guys like you." He said, "We got an experimental truck. We're just going to give that to you guys for testing." And I thought, well, hell, that's just a bunch of bullshit. But a couple weeks later, sure enough, they come up the alley there, John Decker, and they walked up, said, "Hey, we got this experimental truck down here. Why don't you come and take a look at it?" Well, we went down at Bellefonte Motor Sales and jumped in a Pontiac car and went out to where Genselmore's trucking is now, and that used to be the Mobile, like a little distributor place there where they sold gas. But inside the building there was this goddamn big international 10-wheeler. Of course, I'm kind of young at the time, and I opened the hood, and boy, there's a goddamn big V8 in there. Never saw such a thing, you know. I said, "How many horsepower?" "None of your goddamn business how many horsepower it is. You just look." Well, it wound up that I got to drive it, even though I had a Dodge truck. My dad hired a driver for me. He wanted me to drive this experimental truck, which I did. And of course, I was king of the road because that thing was 260 horsepower. The average 10-wheeler was 125, 30. International, Whites, Brockways, didn't matter, Fords. So I was king of the road with that thing. That was just like driving a Cadillac passing a Volkswagen. I did anything I wanted to do. Well, this end of the experiment, and they gave us the truck there at cost, put a brand new motor in it down at Harrisburg, and then my dad bought the truck for cost. And so in a roundabout way, I wound up buying a new Brockway. So I take it down to the International Garage to get it greased, and John Decker come in there and he said, "Hey, no headquarters for that truck. Get it the hell out of here." I said, "Hey, John, I know you think I'm kind of a traitor, but," I said, "you know, you wanted $16,000 for your International, and I bought this Brockway for $11,500. I said, "What in the hell did you do?" I said, "I'm just getting started in life. Get it out of here." So that's when I start being a mechanic with a grease gun. Well, anyhow, the first day that I had this Brockway, that night there was grease all over the wheel. So I called Norm Thompson's Wheel Sport and told them about it. They said, "Well, you want to put the seal in, you want to bring it down?" I said, "No, just send her up in the bus." They sent her up in the bus. I put it in that night. Next day it leaked again. Called them up. "Oh, you didn't do it right. You have to bring it down." So I took it down to Williamsport. They put the seal in, run her the next day, grease all over the place. So bring her back down. We're getting the factory guy in here. So I take it down. Guy puts this white coat on with a curlicute pipe. He crawls under there and he comes underneath the truck and he said, "Well, that guy's getting fired." "Why?" In the meantime, they had the wheel off up back there. He said, "See that keyway?" "Yeah, that's cut too deep." Well, back in them days, they had an inner seal and an outer grease seal. And this grease was leaking out from under the seal. And of course, there wasn't oil seals back then. You packed them wheel bearings by grease. He said, "The keyway's too loose or too deep." He said, "Them threads on your housing are kind of bad." So he said, "I'm going to give you this book." And he said, "If you ever have any trouble with this truck, with this housing, you get a new housing." He said, "You have your choice right now. I'll put a new housing in there or just put a little braze on there and take care of that." I said, "Well, I just put a little braze on her. I'm going to get the hell gone." So lo and behold, my brother Bob had these Internationals. He had a guy driving there, and he said, he was actually our neighbor. He said, "Carl, what did they find with your truck?" And I told him, I said, "They said if I ever had any trouble, why, they'd take care of it." So lo and behold, 22 years later, this guy's driving for me. The same truck. I had this truck 37 and a half years. So it was kind of a long vehicle. And he's driving it, you know, and I come in there this day, and he was a good mechanic. He had it all apart and said, "Look, damn grease seal went bad. Look at your housing." I said, "Holy hell, them threads are kind of bad." "Yeah." He said, "What are you going to do?" Well, Brockway had a little narrow nut, then a big collar with a bunch of holes in it, and then a tin thing, and then another nut. I said, "Well, let me see if the International works." So I went down to the International Garage. Theirs, they had a nut, little piece of tin, and then and instead of a seal and stuff there, their seal was just built in the nut with a little rubber on there. So I got that, and that was thick. See, that gave me a nice good bite. Then that tin, and I just got enough to hold it with the outer one. So we got it all together. He said, "You know what? Didn't you tell me that housing was guaranteed?" "Yeah." "Well, I'd call them son of bitches up." I said, "Yeah, you got the book in there. It's in there by your desk." Oh, I get the book out. I calls Troy, Michigan. Talked to this guy, and he said, "You mean tell me you want me to warranty this housing after 22 years? I said, "Well, I don't care if you warranty it or not, but it did fail, and the guy told me they would take care of it." He said, "Well, who told you this?" I said, "Well, the guy down at Norm Thompson's at Williamsport." "What's his name?" He said, "I don't know." "Well, see if you can find out." So I calls Williamsport, know Bill Tomke, he's about my age. He's the one that steamed the wheel out. And I said, "Bill, you remember steaming that wheel out in that old Brock of mine?" "Yeah, now what are you up to?" I said, "Well, that housing failed. who was that guy, that factory guy? Oh, I don't know, but he said, Dad might know, he's in the office. So he came back out. Yep, he said, that was a guy by the name of Fitzpatrick from New Jersey. Now what are you up to? Well, I said, that wheel come loose there, the wheel bearing, the nuts are bad back there. He said, well, let me know how you make out with this. So lo and behold, I called a guy back at the factory, and he said, yeah, Fitzpatrick, he worked for us. He said, well, I guess we owe you a housing. I told him I had this book, page so-and-so, and it's right there, guaranteed for the life of the vehicle. So time goes on a couple, 6, 7 weeks. Ford Trucking Company comes in the garage. Hey, Carl, you owe me $6.42. I said, what the hell for? He said, well, we got a crate, a thing in here, but it has your house address. And he said, you live up there and your garage is here, so I have to charge you from there to here $6.42. The rest of it is paid. So we opened up the crate. There's a goddamn brand new housing. There's a new pumpkin gasket with all the studs. These rear ends were made like a Mack. They went down in, not forward. Nice, straight, dry shaft. Couldn't beat the system. It just rode like goddamn Cadillac. Well, anyhow, had 2 new axles, new seals, wheel bearings, races, everything was there to put her together, back together. Of course, we never put that in for, 5 or 6 years later, because it held up, the old one. But National Jip up there went on strike, and we had no work. And this same guy's working for me. He said, well, let's put that new housing in. We ain't working. So we finally did put it in. But I did have that truck for 37 and a half years. And this guy up here at Hallbaker's was the boss. And he come in there one day, and he said, hey, Carl, where's the old Brock? I said, up there in the garage. I want to take a look at it. Yeah, go ahead. It was summertime, door was open. I heard him start the damn thing, there wasn't any license on it. He came back down, he said, hey, I want to buy it. And I said, sure, I don't want to sell it. I said, I had it too long, I'm going to keep her. Look, goddamn you, he said, you made money off of me over there. I gave you good work at Hallbaker's. He said, now it's my turn. He said, I'll just give you $8,750 for that. So at the end of the story, I lost a couple $1,000 depreciation for 37 and a half years of service.
Yesterday I was down at the bottom of the hill there looking at my old trucks over, and I was messing around that F8 there, and I got to thinking about what it was like going up the hills in low gear and going down in low gear and things like that. I got to thinking about one day I was going out to Von Hall. So when you went up over Crescent Mountain, you get up there past the ice pile, that's where about it got the stiffest, It pulled down a little bit there. But anyway, I get up to the top and pulled in the right side there. Crescent Ridge, I think they called it Crescent Restaurant then. Started to walk across the road, and I pulled in beside this long-nosed white when they first came out with them coming to them. Butler got a bunch of them. I think Ducky probably drove one of them. But I don't think they only had about a 170 coming to them. Anyway, this guy gets out of the truck, and he's waving at, hey. Yeah. So how about giving me a pull? He said, I can't get my truck started. He just had a single axle trailer on, and it was empty, And I said, well, I can probably give you a pull. So I said, you watch. I backed up to the front of him, and I said, you hook the chain up. I'm not hooking the chain up. And I thought I could smell ether pretty good, I said, you've been giving this ether? Yeah, he said, I thought maybe I could get her going, but I can't. I said, okay. He hooked the chain up, and I put the old F8 in low, and started out. I only didn't go too far, and I heard her start. It started and blew up at the same time. Back there, I can still remember saying, I don't think you're going to go very far, buddy. He said, I don't know who I'll be working for after this. But that was one of the good things I, happened to think about. But today, it's nice to get in the old trucks once in a while and take a ride around town or go down for coffee or something. Brings back a lot of memories, and you can see how far trucks come today. When you close the door on them old trucks, there was metal there. Today there's a lot of plastic and fiberglass, I think. But I enjoy tinkering around with them and running around a little bit.
I was 15 years old when I started to haul coal out of a strippings, and it was a private road. You didn't have to have a license. My dad always kept us 2 or 3 old trucks, and that's when I started. And all I ever had in my mind was driving truck all my life. And we hauled coal out of the strippings and stockpiled it. You didn't need no license, And I did that when I wasn't going to school in the summer. And then after that, I sort of, after 6 years of it, I wanted to get out of the hauling coal. It was uncertain. Some days you'd work, some days you wouldn't. And you get in the mud and the water, and in the wintertime it would freeze. And it was a pretty good challenge, and I thought, well, I got to find something else to do. I don't want to do this all my life. And I went through the time the coal miners had to strike, and they started to shoot and really carry on. And then we finally parked our trucks and got out of there. But that got pretty rough when they started to strike. And things like that happened. But when I was 16 years old, my dad bought a brand new Studebaker truck back after World War II. They were about the only trucks you could buy then, and they were a good little truck. I think Carl had one. Didn't you have a Studebaker? Yeah. And he bought a new one. It was 1947. I'll never forget that day. He told me to get a load of stone over at Nidix and take it up to Tyrone, which I did. And he said, hurry back down and help John Crape down at National Gyp when they cleaned out a kiln down there when it would burn out. Why, John, he'd get all the off-fallings, but he had to clean it out. And he'd hire us to help him. So I was in a hurry, and I come down 550 there, Buffalo Run, and it was kind of windy, and it was raining pretty hard. And I come down there, and I started to slide. Man, there was this big oak tree right in front of me, and I hit that baby head on right in the center, and I'll tell you, it was a hell of a jolt. I went out through the windshield, and I get out, and then I finally walked around a little bit and come to my senses, and I looked up. I thought, Mr. Studebaker, you're done. And it was. I mean, it was smashed all to pieces. And so we got, I think it was Lou McClellan. I'm not sure whether it was him or not. We got a wrecker. Jim, my older brother, he was always helping us, and Dad, he was working. And we took it home, and boy, I could imagine what my dad was going to say when he got home. And he looked at it, and he said, what the hell did you hit? I said, I don't know. He said, well, you're done driving, no more. I was 16 years old, then, and I really felt bad. In a couple of weeks, he had me back driving again. But like I said, I wanted to get out of the coal business. It just wasn't my cup of tea, And so then I thought, well, I got to get something that's going to be steady, So to this day, I got in the milk business, hauled milk, and we're still going strong.
My attachment to trucking started in July 1957. I went to work in the garage for Guy Saquette. Some of the folks in here probably knew Guy personally. A lot of them probably never met him, but knew of him. from Jersey Shore to Lexington, North Carolina to Chicago, you always saw some of the guys' trucks broke down. And I think one of his downfalls was he never had a shop chief who knew which way the parade was going as far as maintenance goes. When I worked for him in '57 till about August or September of '59, the shop chief, guy favored eating two-speed rears. And if the chief took out 6 shims on the pinion when he rebuilt a rear end, that's the amount of shims that went back in the pinion bearings. And he didn't know what a dial indicator was nor white lead for checking the mesh and the differentials, ring gear and pinion mesh. And he would stick the nose of the pinion down in a tin 5-gallon oil bucket. He'd stand over top of it and work the ring gear back and forth. He said, that's about right. And I don't think Guy ever got over 30,000 miles out of one of his rebuilt rear ends. In the previous session, I told you about my first trip into New York City coming through the Lincoln Tunnel. Well, another quick story on that same truck, 1953 Brockway, 154WHS model. I was on my way to Gardner, Massachusetts in 1961 with a load of steel from the Jersey Shore Steel Mill. And that was before Interstate 88 was built going north. And we went to Binghamton and got on Route 7. About 2 o'clock in the morning, going up Route 7 near Oneonta, New York, the asbestos copper-coated donut between the exhaust pipe and the manifold blew out. Well, those Brockways on the horizontal floorboard was made out of marine plywood. Well, lo and behold, caught the plywood on fire. So I got it out and out. I let off the throttle a little bit. And up in Oneonta, at a Texaco fuel stop we had, Mike, I don't never know his last name, he lived above his shop with his family. And we normally stopped there anyway to get gassed up on the way to Gardner. And he come out of bed in the middle of the night and he replaced that donut for me. Well, about 4 or 6 weeks later, I'm heading to New York City or New Jersey, and that was before Interstate 78. Going up 22, going up Jugtown Mountain in New Jersey near Clinton, that doggone donut burned out again. So I knew what to do, so I backed off the throttle, cranked my window down, had my head sticking out the window so I didn't gas myself. And Jugtown Mountain was a 4-lane divided road. Portable barnyard passed me, and that had a load of pigs on. When I got a whiff of that pig manure, I didn't even have the truck anchored off to the side of the road yet, and I was puking my guts out. So anyway, at the last meeting also, Sam Lansbury mentioned Don Keeler's name. And in 1963, I put together this 10-wheeler dump truck, and Don Keeler was my mentor. And I got a few spacers for the back axle off of Don for this truck. The construction of this truck is another story for another time. And one of Guy Saquette's 1954 W22 weight, some of the components of that truck is built into this 10-wheeler. And when I had this truck on the road, I hauled in excess of 46,000-pound payload on this truck. That's me sticking my head out the door, and that's when I still had hair.
And I'm just like all these other truckers, you just ain't gonna believe this shit. That's what a truck driver starts you off with. You just ain't gonna believe this shit. So that's the way this is. But we've been fooling around with these old trucks since we've been 16 years old, and still fooling around with them. Too damn dumb to quit driving them like some of these other guys are. But of course, we worked for Carl and Bob for a long time, hauling beer, and we've done a little bit of everything around over the years together and with these guys and coal, and started out hauling pulpwood, and then we went over to Manny's, which was Homer, Dick's dad, Herb's dad, and had a bunch of damned old Federals, and of course the old EQ Mac that Chris keeps talking about the story. Excuse me, it took us 2 weeks to get one 10-ton load of coal from Key Wading to the Warner Company in Bellefonte. We'd go a little ways and she'd blow a head gasket. We'd tear a head off of her right along the road. There was no damn big wreckers like there is sitting around everybody's shop there is today to drag you in, so you worked on her where she broke down. Merle was with us, drove with us, and we had the tools or call back to the shop and somebody'd bring you, what was that, an old Oldsmobile we had for a service vehicle then. And somebody'd bring some tools if you didn't have enough with her and set your flares out and started repairing her right along the road. Go jump in the car, go for a head, go over a head gasket, bring her back, put her together, go a little ways. Same thing again, she'd pop another head or another head gasket. So finally after 2 weeks we got her same load of coal to Bellefonte in that period of time. And of course we'll have to add to that as Chris and them were going to say they doctor it up. So that was part of that story. And we had the old Federals for a good number of years there. Had the old Brownie three-ways in. You'd reach over across the cab and try to get her up into overdrive, and she'd get in between the slots, and there she'd stick. Now you's locked out of gear. Get her stopped, get your tools out, put the damn lever back in the middle so you could shift gears again in it. That old Brownie would do that quite often, and Herb can vouch for that when he drove the damn thing. And we hauled coal to Lock Haven up down the valley there for a good number of years also in them damned old Federals. And then we got into buying Macs. Dick started going out to United Auto Wreckers in Ohio there and buying junkyard dogs. And we'd bring them home and build them up out there in their shop and do whatever we needed to do, motors or started putting them out, made tandem axles out of single axles and a little bit of everything as it went along the way. When the law changed to the 5-axle rigs, we made 5-axle rigs right there in the shop. And we did that till in 1969, I decided to buy my own and went down to Lou McClellan's and bought an old B model. There's pictures over here laying of it that I started with and schlepping it till I wore myself clean out. My mother kept telling me, "You're gonna make an old man out of you," and I said, "No, never me." Well, it finally did. So then Dick got some Macs in out there, and we put 318s in them. And that was a mistake, but that's another story too, as George would say. And we have pictures of what's left of it. If I don't know whether you all seen them or not, but when we took it over to Dick's shop, we were going to put a Maxidyne motor in it. And one of his trucks came in from New England that was on fire. They figured that's what happened, and all that's left is a skeleton of mine laying there in the shop. It melted it clean to the ground, so that sort of put us out of the trucking business real quick, and so we've just been driving for everybody else since then, but that was the end of our trucking business.
But anyway, I've got a couple stories to tell, and hopefully something good for the trucking business. The first of which was back in the late 60s, I was working for my brother Dick in the Keyway trailer plant out in the old Curtis Wright buildings out in Queehana. And Dick built the Keyway trailers, the pup trailers and log trailers, and sold logging equipment and log beds. In the process of doing that, he sold Barco loaders, Ramey's first, made in Oregon, and then Barco's made in Twin Falls, Minnesota, and Twin Rivers, I'm sorry it was, Minnesota. So he needed a load of log loaders, and of course he never needed them except near a holiday. So the day after Christmas in 1968, I started for Minnesota with an 1890 model International single axle. It was real long, had a 5-speed and a 2-speed mechanically shifted auxiliary transmission in it with a 453 Detroit engine. Now this thing had less power than the heater motor of a Crosley. It was basically a gutless wonder, but it did propel the truck. But anyway, I took off for for Minnesota to get the log loaders. And on the way out, it was blistering cold. And of course, fighting the headwind going west, that thing didn't make any heat at all, not working the engine enough to make any heat. So I had a real convenient, great big heavy blanket, I guess they called it a hap, that my mother had given me that her dad and them used to use in the sleigh when she was a kid. But I had that across my legs, try to keep my legs warm. And driving out west in that thing, you couldn't see inside or outside, so I had a big ice scraper. Now, I didn't have an onion. Dick didn't tell me about the onion by then to keep the frost off the windshield. I had an ice scraper, so you drive with one hand and scrape the ice off the inside of the windshield so you could see to keep going with that thing. And of course, hopefully, you kept the windshield wiper defrosted enough on the outside that you could see, and every now and again have to stop and pound that off and keep going. Well, going up through Wisconsin, the thing started to miss a little bit, and I'd been around them long enough to know it was either an injector going bad or a cam follower. So I get into Minnesota, into the factory, the day before New Year's. I pulled into the factory with it and backed inside, and it was starting to miss pretty nasty then. So I called Dick and I said, Dick, the old Detroit's either got an injector going bad or a cam follower going bad. And he said, run that dang thing. I ran them things lots of times. You'll make her home. Well, like a fool, I believed him, because the guy at the factory offered to let me stay inside the warm building the rest of that day and on through New Year's Day, whatever I needed. I could have been in the warm. Anyway, they put 5 log loaders on it, which was about 11 ton on that freaking little 453 Detroit, and about 1 o'clock, I'm out the door, heading home. So I started down through Duluth and coming on 53 down out of Wisconsin. I'm coming along, and right on top of a hill, it was 4 below zero, about 4 feet of snow. And I'm motoring along, and all of a sudden the steam flew and the Detroit quit and the pieces rattled, and there she did, blowed up. So I popped it into neutral and started the Jewish overdrive downhill, and it had vacuum brakes on it. So I had to be a little careful because I didn't have a lot of brake to work with, but fortunately it was downhill enough that it kept going, but it kept slowing down. And I kept going and going and going and had no idea where I was, but it was about our time about 4:30, so their time it would be what, 3:30. So finally, it's just about stopped, and I saw some lights coming ahead down in front of me, and it pulled on down in, and a big parking lot off the right side, and I drifted down into that, and the overhead door was real high. Kind of strange, I didn't expect that from a gas station. Anyway, it was Solon Springs, Wisconsin. So I pulls in, and it's, of course, dead. I crawl out and go inside, and there's a kid working the gas station there. Of all things, his name was Charlie Brown. So, first I didn't believe this. Yeah, it's truly Charlie Brown. So anyway, I talked to him, told him I was blowed up, and he said, what are you going to do? I said, I don't know. I'm from Pennsylvania. It's New Year's Eve. I don't have any idea what I'm going to do. I said, I could work on it if I could get inside. And he said, well, the old guy that owns this place is really a miserable old cuss. And he's out in the woods right now bringing his logging equipment in for the holiday weekend so that the people didn't bust it up, how they do. And I said, well, he's a logger. And he said, yeah. And I said, that explains the big high door. And he said, yes, sir, that's why. He has a log truck. So it wasn't 10 minutes. This guy pulls in with his log truck with a Eager Beaver trailer on the back and his dozer on the trailer. So he jumps out of the truck and walks around and looks at that whole load of new log loaders sitting there, and lo and behold, he had a Barco loader. So he come prancing inside and asked me, what's going on? I said, well, the old Detroit swallowed a cam follower and she blew up. I said, I'm in bad shape. I'm from Pennsylvania. I need someplace to work on the truck. All of a sudden, this guy came out of nowhere with his log truck, and you couldn't have asked for a nicer man. He did everything in the world to help me out there with that truck. And he said, well, the only way I can get you in, he said, I have to take the dozer off of this truck and put it on my other truck and put it inside and put the skidder on this trailer and blah, blah, blah. He said, it'll take me a while. But he said, I'll do it, and then I'll get you inside. He said, we'll take something else and push you inside. Lo and behold, he does all this to get me inside. Well, in the meantime, I got on the phone and called St. Cloud, Minnesota. I was a Detroit dealer, and talked to the people out there, and I knew I needed the camshaft and the cam follower and the gasket set and everything I needed to put that piece in, but I had a hole broke out through the side of the block too. And so I talked to the people at Detroit, and they said, well, we don't normally do this, but if you're that desperate on New Year's Eve and willing to try to fix it, we're going to help you out. So they got at and packaged all the parts and the pieces up I needed, and in addition to the special puller to pull the camshaft gear off, the camshaft inside that truck, and said they would fly it into Duluth Airport if I could pick it up there. Charlie Brown agreed to be my chauffeur with a Volkswagen to go to Duluth. So anyway, we got the truck inside, and I started to tear it down. Well, the camshaft had to come out the front, of course, but the gear had to come off the back. Well, I wasn't about to take the engine out, so I took the torch and cut a hole in the firewall in under the dash and blow the dash in the truck so I could get at the camshaft gear back there to pull it off. And then, of course, had to take the radiator and everything out of the front, but it was already drained around. Didn't have any problem getting the water out of it. But I tore it down, and within 4 hours or 5, I suppose, I had the camshaft out. And of course, it was ruined and had everything tore apart. But there I had this gaping hole in the block. So anyway, I started to gather up pieces, and when it blew out, it blew some of them in on the inner fender. There was a flat place. A good many of the pieces blew in there and froze fast because it was so cold, so I found them. So anyway, I forget the man's name that owned the garage, and I wish I could remember, but I don't. He came in to see how I was making out, and I said, I forgot nickel cad rods to weld the block. He said, I got some. So he went in the back room someplace and dug out this whole bundle of nickel cast rods, NICADs, but they were so wet, the flux would slide up and down off them. So I took them and laid them out on a grill on top of the furnace to dry them out. And that dried them out, to get the moisture out of the flux, but they were still loose. The flux was still loose like a straw on a rod. Anyway, I cleaned the pieces up, and I started welding on that thing, welding these pieces back into it. And of course, you guys that are welders know you only weld, 1/8 of an inch on cast iron, then you got to shot peen it with a hammer and a prick punch to stretch it out so it doesn't break out. So I started welding, and about 3 o'clock in the morning, this was New Year's Day, New Year's Eve, I was so tired I couldn't see anymore. So there was a hotel next door that was having a party, so I went over there to get a room to try to lay down and sleep a little bit. Well, I went over and got the room, went upstairs to the room, there were no doors on the room. It was just open in a bed, and there you were. Well, I laid down and tried to sleep till about 5:30, and they were still partying. These Solon Springs, Wisconsin people really know how to party. So I couldn't sleep. So I get up, went back over and started working on the welding again. About 8 o'clock, Charlie Brown came in, with whom I had scheduled, and he took me up through Duluth in a Volkswagen. It wasn't any better than my International. We couldn't see out the windshield on the inside of that thing. There was no heat in it either. So I took my ice scraper along, cleaned the windshield. We get to the airport and got the parts, which they had flown in. Sure enough, they were there. Started back down, and so we're getting hungry, but we need something to bring along. There wasn't much open but the Kentucky Fried Chicken. So I stopped at KFC and told Charlie, and we stopped in there, and I bought a big bucket of chicken. And this kid had never even seen Kentucky Fried Chicken. He was amazed what it was. So he ate more of it than I did. But we get back to Solon Springs, and we had the parts, and I started to weld and again on the block, getting it back together, and I got it all down except a little wee triangular piece about that big I couldn't find. Just then the old man from they owned the place come over, and I said, do you have any cast anywhere, any kind of pieces? And he said, well, I don't know, I'll have to look around. He said, maybe there's a old Ford generator bracket from the old Ford V8s. He said, I think they were cast, laying out in the junkyard. So we goes out in about 4 feet of snow and digging around, and son of a gun, if we didn't find that old generator, you talk about the good Lord being with you in luck, we brought it in, and sure enough, it was cast, it wasn't magnetic. So I took a hacksaw and cut a piece out of it, fitted it in there and started welding it in. About 2 or 3 hours later, I had her welded up, and then I started putting it back together. Well, then the next day, that was during New Year's night, I laid down just on the truck seat that night and slept for a little bit. And the next day, I got up in the morning and started putting her back together again, and he went to the woods. And so he came back. Well, anyway, I got it all back together and put coolant water, antifreeze and everything in it, and it wasn't leaking outside. Well, I don't know if it's leaking inside or not, but anyway, I get in the old girl and hit the key, and she took right off, ran like a top. So I bought 3 jars of Bars Leak off of them there at the gas station. And I thought, I'm going to have something with me, and so I put one in it, just in case. So I backed her outside, and I didn't get any more than outside. It was about 4:30 on the 2nd of January, and he comes pulling in. So I didn't wait 10 minutes, because I wanted to see what I owed him for being there. And so he come pulling in, and he get out of his log truck, and he looked that thing over and saw the smoke puffing on it and stuff, and just stood there and shook his head. So he come inside, and he said, if you'd have told me 2 days ago that thing would ever run again, I'd have never believed you. But he said, there it is running. And I said, yeah, I'm going to head home with it too, as soon as I know how much I owe you. He said, I'm going to tell you something. He said, anybody can do that to that truck and get it running again. You don't owe us a penny. So he let me go without paying him a cent. He patted me on the back. He said, good luck. So I headed out with her and come down out of Wisconsin back to Ohio to the last roadside rest. You guys know the name of it, on the Ohio Pike, before you get to Pennsylvania. Started raining and freeze, and that was Sunday morning. So I pulled in there to let it straighten out, raining and freezing. And about 11 o'clock, I got awake again, and they had the roads ashed and stuff. And so I started on home with it and got home. 80 wasn't open yet. Had to come the back way. I got home about 5 o'clock in the afternoon and got my wife to come to the shop to get me, and I collapsed. I was dead tired. She even had to scrub me in the bathtub. I couldn't even scrub myself. I was that played out. Anyway, I made it home with it. Dick kept the truck for another 2 or 3 years, finally put a stiff leg boom crane on it, sold it to Carnes Equipment Company in Clearfield, and they used it in their roof truss business up there until they sold out in about 94, 95. Somebody bought it at the sale, and it's still working someplace. With that one Bars Leak in it, never leaked a drop of water out of that thing. You talk about the good Lord being with you and good people being in the world. There are a lot of good people out there if you just give them a chance. I mean, those people didn't have no me from Adam. And Charlie Brown and the man that owned the garage, the Detroit Diesel people, everybody just bent over backwards to help me. And it's one of those things that you just have to be thankful for all the days of your life, because I'd have been stranded in Solon Springs, Wisconsin without their help. There's just no question. So I'm very thankful, and a good story for trucking.
I messed around, been around trucks since, my dad, ever since I can remember, had a few trucks. I used to run them around, backing them around, moving them around when I probably was 10 years old. I was probably running them around before he realized I was driving around, and he wasn't around one of them, or whatever was sitting there. Anyway, today different ones talked about different things, and it just brought to mind different little things that I encountered over the years. I believe Bob Hines said about blowing the tire on the truck in Malsburg by the cop. I can remember going along, moving right along, and I blew a tire in the truck, and there was a hitchhiker walking right. I was right beside him. It cracked. Scared me, and I can't imagine what it did to him. That was, that's just one little incident. And I believe it was Carl was talking about how, or someone talked about the old Dodges had a Dodge with twin carburetors on it. We had one of those. Now, Carl said it had a lot of power. What I can remember, the one we had no power. I mean, this is real. I had 10 ton on it. It was a Y or a Z tag, but it had vacuum or hydraulic brakes. 5-speed and a 2-speed rear end vacuum shift. Big old Timken double reduction rear. I'm going up out of Pleasant Gap, up around the curves with 10 ton on. It was a dump truck, but I had 10 ton on it. One of Davidson's come up behind me and followed, had one of those F models with the V8, I think it was one of the V8 Max, you know, they had a few of those, and they weren't much power neither. He followed me for a little bit and passed me on the curves going, and it wasn't at night neither. I mean, he turned his lights out. So that's how powerless it was. But one more thing about it, we used it to haul limestone out of the plant. We had a stockpile. And I'm going up to the stockpile. I was in high first, and I probably had, I don't know, a pretty good 12, 13 ton. I really don't know. I had a pretty good load on it. Going up this hill, pretty much a one-way up or down. I mean, it wasn't a wide road. It was on company property, but man coming down, loader operator coming down there with the loader. Well, I'm going up there, and I'm running out of power. I'm in high first. Well, I saw him coming. I pushed the clutch in, go on the brakes, and it was too light in the front end. I couldn't hold it, and I couldn't steer it, and I about stalled out. So the 2-speed had gone into neutral, and I'm freewheeling it, and down at the bottom, it's like I thought, well, here I go, Well, I pushed the button down, as a mechanic, a cable controlled. I pushed that thing down. It went into low. It's a wonder it didn't blow it up or bust the drive shaft or something. Charlie afterwards, I mean, the engine, I don't know what it was turning, but front end came up in the air and it finally settled back down. I got down off there and Charlie come down and he said, I saw the whole underside of that truck. He said, you had that thing, I must have had like 4 or 5 feet in the front wheels up in the air. Now that there was, the good Lord was with me. When I think of the different, it could have been a catastrophe. I thought of a few others. One, they were talking about the Federals. I can remember this was, I was out in Ohio there at a truck stop. I stopped and I came out and there was an old Federal sitting, a 1954 Federal sitting beside me, a tractor. And the fellow had a load of steel on. Well, he's changing a tire. You're talking about scrap tires or, Heinz was talking about old wore out tires and whatever. And he's changing a tire in his truck. Well, this, caught my attention, this old Federal. So I went over. Well, he was from out in I think, if I remember, one of the Dakotas. Boy, he said, I never come in east here, very seldom. And he got to tell me what he paid for this truck. I think, if I remember right, like $350. It was a diesel. It had a Cummins in it, tag axle. I mean, that frame was patched, holes in it. It looked a fright. But he's changing tires there. We got this tire on, and I mean, I think they had biased tires, but I mean, they didn't match up at all. And I said, that doesn't match up too good. No problem. He said, I got 17 more tires around here. He said, I'll keep switching them around till I get them to match. And he said, those 2 tires there, he said, my neighbors, they got trucks. He said, they threw them out. Well, there's nothing wrong with them. He said, I went and got them. He said, see that tire there? He said, he said the cords were coming out the inside. He said, I found it setting up along guardrail at the truck stop. He said, I just put a boot in it. It's doing good. But he said, he said, I got a girl wanted to go to school. I forget, I think it was beautician school, if I remember right. He said, I very seldom come in this far, but he said, I brought a load in from out there, and he said, it really paid good. He said, I couldn't turn it down. He said, I'm on my way back now with this load of steel, but he said, not too many people can pick up a load that pays more than what their truck cost them. So I never forgot that. Well, then he got the sand out of the nut came off the pinion. on his rear end, and the yoke, you know, so, well, I said, he was somewhere down around Bedford or somewhere down in there, and he said, boy, I didn't know what to do. He said, well, a couple young fellows came along, and he said, I gave him a couple bucks, and he said, they came back with a whole box, you know, different sized nuts. Well, he said, I got under there with a file and a hammer and a chisel, and I got to working at the threads, and I finally got a nut to fit. He said, I'm good to go. He said, you know, and he said, I can go in the bar and sit down and have a drink with those bankers. He said, I don't owe them any money. He said, but I can sit down and drink right beside them. He said, I'm doing good. You know, I never forgot him. That kind of amused me. And I have a few other stories, and I can't even quite remember them now, but, I got probably one more. I had a Ford years ago. Probably most fellas remember it. Before 80 was built, I was going out through Mishannon, out over down in across, what is that, Red Mishannon, up the other side. Well, they were building 80, and there's this old B model Mack going, 10-wheeler. And I only had a truck, you know, the truck. I didn't have the trailer on the back, just had the straight truck. And it ran pretty good, you know, one of those 534 gas engines. It, you know, in their day, they ran pretty lively. Well, I started down through there, and this old Mack, I knew he'd be going up the other side real slow. So I kind of held off. Well, there was a Buick car and a Dodge pickup. The Dodge pickup, the man was working on 80 out around Bigler there, and he was from Snowshoe. Anyway, I sort of timed it going down that I didn't have to lose my momentum going up the other side, and I could pass this load of stone. Well, I had it figured out pretty good. Well, I started passing with this fellow in the Dodge pickup. He had a fleet side, you know, a smooth side pickup. He decided he was going to pass. Well, I'm passing, he pulls out the pass. Well, I had center point steering on the truck, you know, the hub stuck out. I got the whole side of that pickup. Well, of course, we called the police. You know, state police came out of Phillipsburg, came over there, and this fella, state police says, you know, you're getting a ticket, said to him. He said, I never had a ticket all my life. You know, I wasn't in the wrong. He said, the policeman said, you pulled out the pass when he was passing. Huh. He said, I was passing. He said, he come up and tried to pass me up the berm. He said, I said, well, I was over on the berm trying to get away from you. No, he said, I'm going to take this to court. And the policeman said, you take it to court. And he said, I'm going to be there. He said, you're going to lose. Well, I never heard other than we got a bill from the Dodge dealership for a couple $1,000s for whatever, but, you know, nothing ever materialized. And it had a short fourth transmission, which a lot of people don't know what a short fourth is. Does everyone here know what a short fourth is? Well, no, it was, you went from low fourth to low fifth to high fourth to high fifth. High fifth and low fourth low fifth and high fourth were turned around. And yeah, it was a nice, once you got used to it, it's a nice transmission to drive. You know, if you're coming into a hill, instead of going ahead, you know, you could hit the 2-speed and you're like dropping a whole gear. But people would get in that truck and I'd be going along, you know, I'd go into low fourth, up into low fourth and back into low fifth, up into high fourth. And they'd be looking, what kind of driving is that? Well, one more thing about that. I had a air 2-speed on it. It was air shift on the 2-speed. I very seldom ever missed. Now, I don't know. I very seldom ever missed though, but I had I could always hit it. And I usually would go into neutral in my transmission and shift my button and go back and sort of free everything up. You didn't get that grinding in your 2-speed and whatever. Well, I'm out in this back road with the truck, and I was in low fourth, if I remember. Start down this hill. I believe I'm going a little too fast, better gear down, so I went to go to high third. Well, I got it in between in the 2-speed. Well, the only next thing to do was I had to go to high fourth. And I down off this hill. I got down to the bottom and the man was leading me or taking me where I was supposed to go. He was at the bottom of the hill there. He's like, you know, well, boy, I just went bouncing and flying by him. It was on a curve. That scared, the good Lord was with me that day too. I come back across that road. It was on the back, I don't know, in back of St. Mary's to Glen Hazel, back road out through there. And I come back through there sometimes, I think, you know, you're lucky you're an old man. You're around here to remember this, you know. Some of the stupid stuff that we done. And it just amazes me the way people, you can see why there's accidents. No one's looking ahead. I mean, they aren't thinking what can happen. And I think, you know, they say the younger fellas say, hey, old man, get off the road, you're afraid to go fast. But I think the older you get, the more you realize, or the more you're conscious of what can happen, and it can happen quick.
I grew up in the trucking industry. My grandfather had trucks, my dad had trucks, and so I wound up buying a truck. The first truck was a 47 K Model International. I hauled coal from Snohomish to Philadelphia with it. It's hard to believe. It was in the 60s. If I remember right, it paid $4 a ton. So that'd give me like $88 for a load of coal to Philly, which you couldn't run your car to Philadelphia for $88 today. But it took about 10 hours to make a round trip. And I progressed. Well, first of all, I used to go by Zimmy's Diner down there at Mifflintown, and I seen this V8 International sitting there. And boy, I really liked it. And about 6 months I kept going by, so one day I stopped. It was in pretty sad shape. It had a wooden bumper and everything, and I wound up buying it. I paid $1,200 for it. I financed it at the Mifflintown Bank. I paid $100 a month till I had it paid off. And I kept it for about 10 years. And then I graduated to a Diamond Rio in 1970. And that was a sad story there. I had a lot of trouble with it, and I wound up trading it in on another V8 International. And then I progressed, and I got a 74. I bought a 350 Cummins, and I did pretty well with that, and kept it for about 14 years, and I bought an 88 International, and I kept it till I retired in, I think 93 or 94, somewhere around there. And I, had a lot of stories like these guys, but they pretty much covered everything, I mean.
The guys with the bunk
Huh?
tires. Tell them about the guys with the tires tied to their bed down there.
Oh yeah, my dad, we were working down in York, Pennsylvania, built in '83, and they stayed in this motel down there, and it wasn't much of a motel. You couldn't even see the floor. It was covered with dirt, and they would tie their spare tires to the bedpost at night. I mean, that was just a way of life back then,
I never thought equipment would change as much as it has. I started out driving there's a 51 white 10-wheeler gas engine, probably, I don't know if it had 100 horsepower. Terrible things to drive. Now today, Peterbilt with a 550 horsepower Caterpillar in it, and like Cadillacs compared to the things that I come up through, in the years that I'd been driving. I drove Brockways. I owned a Brockway, B61 Max, whites, F-model Mac, which was a cab over. I don't even know what all I'd driven over the years, some internationals. But if I have a story to tell, I guess it's in the beginning, the highways aren't near what they are today. The old Snowshoe Mountain, I can remember being stuck down there with our trucks. I worked for Carlin Coal Company. They'd come down there with a pickup load of ashes and bags of chains, and they'd ash the road by hand, and we'd put chains on to get ourselves up out of there so we weren't there till the wee hours of the morning. And that's the things that
you know, most people don't see today that we done back then. And then if we get stuck on any of those hills around, you know, the Snowshoe Mountain or anything, we just get up on top of the load and throw coal all over the highway. Today, you know, you're not allowed to do that. DEP or whatever would be, that would really be frowned upon. But yeah, we just throw coal, whatever we had on there, sand, whatever, we would just spread it on the highway so we get going again, or make sure nobody run into you. It would help. So.
I'm in the salvage business because I don't know any better. But anyway, I was just going to tell a couple stories about some characters that's hauled crushed cars for us over the years. And I thought they was pretty comical. And some of them were pretty far-fetched. But some of them I witnessed. So this one guy out of Martinsburg, his name was Joe King. He had one eye. He drove a R model Mack with a sleeper on it. And he hauled cars for us for a long time. And he could back up better than he could drive forward. But there wasn't nothing he would do to get somebody wound up. Well, we was down Johnstown. We was pressing flood cars, digging them out of the ground with loaders, putting like 8 or 10 on a tractor and trailer and grossing about 80,000 because we didn't get all the sand and mud out of them. Well, he's hauling Beaver Falls. He happened to find a mannequin's hand. Well, I knowed what was coming. I was following him down the road, Beaver Falls, with a load on tilt bed we had, and he had a tractor and trailer. We stopped at one of the roadside rests there on the turnpike. I don't know if it was a Howard Johnson at that time or not, but anyhow, his son was with him. We was in there, and it was like a regular diner, and he would talk to anybody, and they would listen. Well, he's talking to this guy, telling him about these flood cars. Well, the first thing the guy wants to know is, we found any bodies? Well, he had his son go out and fix this arm like it's hanging out of the car, and this guy wanted to come out and look at these flood cars on the trailer. Well, he seen that arm, and he lost his dinner, and that was pretty much a story in itself there, but it was pretty much realistic because I was there to see it happen. And we had this other guy home for us. He was a rugged truck driver. He had a beat up old Kenworth. And we was working in Frysburg, New York, hauling to Cleveland, Ohio. Well, he'd come in to load. There would be always something broke on his truck. And he didn't have a dime in his pocket. But he'd get that truck fixed and make that load delivery because he needed the money. Whatever he had to do, he did. And a couple times, his windshield wiper motor broke. And it's in the wintertime. And he tied rope to it through the cab and worked it as he drove down the road. Well, that wasn't so bad. One other time he pulled in, he had 2 flat tires on the trailer. I said, Ernie, so you got 2 flat tires? Oh, I guess I do. I said, well, drop your trailer and we'll have somebody come and fix it. So he goes up to wind the dollies down, and they're gone. That's why he has 2 flat tires. And the same guy, he would do anything for you. He would walk to the shredder mill to pick up a check for you, which he did one time. He was hauling cars out of Portville to Buffalo, going up through Springville. He had an old International. I forget what I had in it for a motor, but anyhow, he blew the rears out and found a set of gas rears and put in it. Well, that's all he could afford. Well, up in Springville, he blew the transmission out, and it was laying for 5 miles along the road up there. He calls from the bar and says, I'm blowed up. I said, well, we'll be up to get you. We get up there, we find the truck and the pieces, and we find the bar, and he's went in there, he wasn't there. Yeah, he said, he's kind of scruffy looking guy. I said, yeah. He said, well, I had to kick him out of here because his pants was ripped and he wasn't covering anything up. I said, yeah, that's him. So here find out he hitchhiked to Buffalo and picked up a check from the previous loads and brought him back to Randolph where we lived. Well, this guy, I swear to God, he had 9 lives. He had a white tractor. He was jumping it one day. The batteries were molded in top of the fuel tank where the batteries were. And he touched the batteries. And we was in the office, and we heard a kaboom. And we went out, and he was still standing there holding the jumper cables. And the fuel tank was blown clean off the end like took a razor blade, and his face was just as black as coal, and he was still stunned. And one other time, the same guy, he had a 10R20 in the trunk of a Fairmont Ford car. Pulled in a gas station to air it up. Well, not paying attention, it blew. Well, his boy's standing there laughing. Well, blew the pants right off him right at this gas station. And he's still alive, and these stories are hard to believe, but they are true. And, you know, there's things like that goes along with trucking, dumb things that happen, but some people live through them.